Welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. If you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of the screen to reveal the chapter titles and starting points of each section. In this week's podcast, I have a couple of tidbits. I have an answer to a question that came up this week. I have an update on my hand spinning bead study, and I have a couple of new projects that I've been working on. So let's get started. This first tidbit came to me in my Wednesday morning knitting group in the park where we've been meeting this summer. Many of you will know that I have a long-term project that I'm working on where I'm knitting a sweater from each decade from the 1890s to the 1990s. And part of that long-term project is knitting sweaters, yes, but it's also to really take a look at how construction methods have changed and how knitting patterns themselves have changed. Like, how have the instructions changed in different time periods? And what happened in my knitting group a few weeks ago is that one of the other women brought a vintage, what's called a sweater wheel, to the group because she thought I'd be interested in it. And I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was a fascinating difference in how a multi-size, multi-yarn weight presentation of how to knit a specific type of sweater, how that could be presented to a knitter. I went and found my own copy of the sweater wheel. In fact, I found two different versions on eBay and got them, and have been really interested in comparing how those sweater instructions were the same or different from what we might see in more contemporary versions of that kind of pattern presentation. So let's go to the overhead and I'll show you what I have. What I found was that there were actually two different versions of the sweater wheel. This one is for set-in sweaters. You'll see it says 360 set-in sweaters, and this one is 360 raglan sweaters. I bought the two of these off of eBay for very little money. It really ranges how much these cost. And when I went to pull it out of the bag, I realized it probably had never, ever been out of the bag before. It was like in brand new condition. So I want to show you what these are like, because different eras have similar ways of presenting multiple sizes of the same type of garment. I just kind of want to show what this is like. So on one half of the wheel, you'll have adult sizes. So we have a misses, a women's, and men's sizes here. They tell you to read first. And so they have three different ranges of sizes. I think there's 6 sizes for, misses, women's, and men's. And then any sweater could be knit in one of 3 different yarn weights. Well, they have the gauges down here. So there's 8 stitches and 10 rows over an inch, which is multiplied by 4, 32 stitches, 40 rows over 4 inches or 10 centimeters, 6 and 8, and then 5 and 7. So they tell you how you read this first, you figure out which yarn weight you're going to use and what needle size you'll probably need in order to get the gauge that is required. So as always, it's the gauge that you're trying to get, and if you need a different needle size than what they tell you, then you should use that different needle size. It's not the needle size that's important, it's the gauge. And then you start here, and you're starting the back for the set-in sleeve. They tell you how much of yarn that you're going to need for a given size. So if I am dialing let's say, these are old sizing systems. These are not the same as they would be today, but a 14 was a 36-inch bust. And so apparently they were selling fingering weight yarn in 1-ounce skeins, and you'd need 11 of them for this size. If you were going to use sport weight, they were sold in 2-ounce skeins, and you'd need 7. If you were going to get worsted weight, they'd be sold in 4-ounce skeins, and you'd need 5 of them. So this tells you your yarn requirements. And then they tell you how many stitches that you need to cast on with that particular yarn weight. So if you're using the thin yarn, 146, the sport 110, and worsted weight 92. So they're telling you each of the steps and what you need to do at each time. They're showing you where to measure for the beginning of the back up to the armhole when you're doing the shaping. So they're giving you the silhouette shape, and they just walk you through each thing. And if you're doing a cardigan, you're going to be doing a left front or right front. And they just have all of the instructions, and here's the instructions for the front. So this is for all of the adult sizes, and then on the back, then you have sizes for everything from a baby and toddlers, then you have children, then you have what they're calling sub-teen, I guess we call it a tween today, boys teen, a junior, which would be a girls teen. So they have a bunch of different sizes, and it's the same process for all of that. And so I just thought that was fascinating, because this is just another way of doing sort of the pick your gauge, pick your size type of knitting that we can see in other publications, both prior to this, at the same time as this, and then what we have in contemporary times. So, you know, up till about 1950, everything came, the sweaters they came in one size. And it was up to you to make the modifications to size it up or down. So I have this book from the 1950s, and they're advertising every size, every weight, every style, which is a big claim, and it's maybe a larger claim than is actually true. They're talking about all the different sizes here, but not every sweater in this book comes in every one of those sizes. What you'll see is, like, for example, this one comes in two sizes, one size that fits sizes 12 to 14 and one that fits sizes 16 to 18. And they have one particular yarn weight that they're being called for. So what they're meaning by this is that there's a variety of sweaters in here that are graded for multiple sizes, and any type of yarn weight you might want to use would be included in here, just not necessarily for every sweater. There are some sweaters that come in, you know, multiple sizes. This one comes in 5 sizes. This one comes in, you know, 5 sizes as well. And so they have this kind of charting situation, which is very similar to that wheel, but it's just laid out sort of in a more linear charted fashion. This is, I think, from the 60s, but before that sweater wheel, men's classics, all styles, all weights, all sizes to 46. So this is a little bit more where they really they have all these different yarn weights, and the sweaters do tend to be, like this one, you might have a couple of different yarn weight choices, and for a range of sizes. And again, it's that kind of charted method of, here's how we're going to go through this, and here's what you're going to do for the different yarn weights. And they tend to be fairly simple sweaters and these kinds of things, because those are going to be the easiest to design for multiple sizes and multiple yarn weights. You're not going to have to worry about pattern symmetry or anything like that. All you have to do is worry about your stockinette stitch. Some of these have cables in them. This is an interesting one. It does come in a couple of different yarn weights, and it's got a really the reason I bought this book is because of that particular shawl collar construction. I was interested in that. So you do see that kind of thing. It's different from the sweater wheel. I mean, the woman who came up with this sweater wheel patented this in 1969. So this was, you know, a pretty new idea. Nowadays, we have these kinds of books, like from Ann Budd. And this type of book even expands those sizes further, where it goes from like a size 2 child up to a man's extra large. And these will include all different types of sweaters, but also there'll be schematics so that you can see how long everything is, and that makes it much easier up front to know if you're going to need to make a modification in some way. But they, you know, saddle shoulder sweaters, set-in sleeve, modified drop, and drop shoulders. And then you can do a crew neck or a turtleneck or V-neck or any of those kinds of things. And she does talk about how to incorporate stitch patterns other than stockinette as well in these books. So she's got, this one is the older book. It's these sweaters were knit bottom up, and this is a newer version, and this one is for top-down sweaters. But again, multiple sizes and multiple gauges. So for me, this has been a fascinating thing to see that once sweaters were actually offered in multiple sizes, how did they take that next step to allow a knitter even more flexibility than just the size, but also the yarn weight, and eventually a really wide range of sizes for whatever type of sweater they were interested in knitting. This second tidbit came to me, I think, in a direct message on Instagram the other day. It was from a person who is a newer knitter, and she or he thought that I would be interested in this particular Instagram account. And I hadn't seen the Instagram account before. I was very familiar with the person's website, which I'd seen many years ago. But this was all new to this person, and I thought, oh, this could be new to you as well. An Instagram account and a website, which I'll leave links to below, for a woman named Althea Crome, who is a micro knitter. So she knits very, very tiny sweaters, like on surgical wire that's like the size of a human hair. So she's knitting things that would have as many stitches as a sweater that I'm knitting that's full size in worsted weight yarn, only she's using silk thread. She's not using yarn, she's using silk thread in these very like hair-like tiny needles. So they'll still have 60,000 stitches in them, and they'll still take, you know, hundreds of hours to knit, but they're like this big. So if you ever saw the movie Coraline, I think that was a Tim Burton movie, the character Coraline had this blue sweater that had stars all over it. And this woman, Althea Crome, is the person who knit that tiny little sweater for the animated character. And she has a number of things on her website. I'm going to show you one that I grabbed from her Instagram account just so you can get an idea of what it is that she does. And again, I'll leave that link down below because it's just incredible. I can't even imagine what that would take to be able to handle things that tiny. Like, what would it do to your hands? And she must have to use a magnifying glass to see what she's doing. I don't know. But she does beautiful work. And I really think it's worth looking at if you haven't seen it before. This question came from a woman, I believe is named Elena. She wrote a comment on a video I did just about a year ago. And that video is, why do my stitches look weird? It's not you, it's the yarn, which I will link to above and below. And the point of that video was to explain why sometimes certain yarns will create stitches that are asymmetrical, where one of the legs is vertical and one angles off to the right. So I explained why certain yarn constructions will produce stitches that look like that. I got a lot of comments on that video after it came out where people were like, oh, thank you for explaining that. And then they wanted to know, well, how can I force the yarn to not do that? And the answer is, you can't. The explanation was why this happens, and that this is what happens when you use a yarn like that. And if you don't want stitches that look like that, then you need to learn to identify yarns that will do that versus yarns that won't. Well, this question said, thank you very much for the video. I now have a better understanding of the stockinette stitch, and I also understand it's not my knitting. Regarding the symmetrical type of stitch, so ones where the stitches are symmetrical, both of them angle out in a perfect V. She said the legs of each stitch are symmetrical in position, but it seems that the yarn is twisted differently on each leg. Why is that? I encountered that in my stockinette stitch projects. I thought it had something to do with how I unwind the yarn, but no matter how much I tried to straighten it out, there is a difference between the left and right leg. I'm going to go to the overhead and I'm going to explain what she's talking about and then why it's happening. The question came in the comments of a video that was talking about why stitches can look asymmetrical. So the yarn that I am using to knit the Solar System socks has what's called an S on S ply. So why do they look asymmetrical? Because people think that they're doing something wrong, and it's just that a certain type of yarn will create stitches that look like that rather than looking like a really balanced, V that you might see in other kind of knitting. So this stocking I knit for my grandniece is an example where the stitches themselves are symmetrical, but if you look at the legs of each stitch, the yarn within those legs looks different. You'll see that on the left leg, you'll see that the twist of the yarn is angled to the left, but in the right leg, it's almost vertical. And she was wondering, how can I fix that? What am I doing wrong? The V is symmetrical, but the yarn doesn't look the same in each leg. So I think I talked about this in a video at some point, just as a side note, and I have no idea what video it was, so I'm just going to explain it here. So if you look, this is the yarn that's used in that stocking, and you have that twist has an angle that's going up to the left. We call this an S twist because the angle of that twist is similar to the center part of the capital letter S. If I lean the strand this way, like you'd see in the left leg of a stitch, it doesn't have quite as steep an angle. It's still angled, but not quite as steep as it was when it was straight up. But what happens if you angle it this way, which is what the right leg of a stitch is like? Well, now it looks very vertical. So the reason you get this difference in what the left leg looks like versus the right leg is because the thing that is making up those two legs of the V has an angle that you can see in it. You see this angled line, and so when you turn that angled line this way, it becomes flatter, and when you turn it this way, it becomes steeper. So more vertical, more horizontal. That's just one of the things that you have to accept about knitting and how it works. It's one of those things that before you became a knitter, you never would have noticed. And so it isn't until you're knitting every single stitch and you're seeing how the stitches are behaving, you're seeing things you didn't expect because you've never noticed before. And also because your commercially knit items are probably much finer gauge and much harder to see. But that is the reason why the left leg and the right leg of a stitch, even if the legs themselves are symmetrical, they're angled out the same, the angle of the twist in the yarn is going to look different in each of those legs. So it's been kind of a couple of weeks here with things in upheaval, and because of that, whenever I have a lot of stress or there's a lot of emotional stuff going on, my knitting tends to shift. Oftentimes I knit less, and that was happening a couple of weeks ago when I was doing a lot more spinning because it wasn't very meditative and I needed this. This is before my father-in-law died. And then he did die, and then we had the whole funeral and everything, and so there's still kind of some tumult going on. So I did start knitting again, but I started a new project. I don't know why it is I can't work on sweaters when I had these kinds of issues. I just observe that it's true and I don't question it. So I will get back to the sweaters probably in the next week or so. So what I worked on, I've got the knitting done, but the project isn't done yet, is a Christmas stocking for my grandniece who will be born at the end of November. So she will be the 8th person to get a knitted stocking like this. When I started this tradition with my nephew and his wife when they had their first baby, And I said, oh, would you guys like Christmas stockings? And we talked through what kind of stocking would they want. Would they want the kind of kitschy mid-century red stocking with the Santa face and the candy canes and the names at the top of the stocking? Or did they want like a stranded color work type of thing? And so I, had to send, they aren't knitters. I had to send them examples of what I was talking about. And they're like, oh no, we want this. We don't want our names on it. Well, let's just pick color for each person. So I designed a stocking. I looked at other stockings. I didn't know how they were proportioned or anything. We never had Christmas stockings when I was growing up. I found some stockings that had some elements I really liked, a stitch pattern I really liked. I used a couple of those elements, and then I just went through my stitch dictionaries and I found things that I liked. And I worked out, well, I want 3 colors. I want a natural color. And then I want the other 2 colors to be different shades. So like a medium blue and a dark blue, or a medium red and a dark red, that kind of thing. And so everybody has had their own color combination. When my niece got engaged, I asked her if they would want stockings as well. Now, she's a knitter and a crocheter. She's very knit worthy and she's very collaborative. It's much easier to get information from her on a timely matter and get things resolved and agreed upon, and then I can move forward. And I said, do you want the same stocking or do you want something different? And she liked the existing stocking, and then they chose their colors for their stockings, and that was their wedding shower gift. And then they had their first baby a couple of years ago, and he got his stocking with his color. So now this baby, who is going to be named Rosie, her colors that her mom chose for her were pink. My niece really loves pink and purple still, even though she's in her 30s. So she wanted pink for the baby. So I bought the yarn and I worked on it. And this is a stocking I have not washed and blocked it. These always look a little ratty at first because, the color work is kind of uneven and a little bit lumpy, and it gets a lot better once that is finished. So I have a couple of things left to do on the stocking. One is to weave in all the ends and wash and block it and get it all nice and smooth out. And then I do a loop here, an I-cord loop, where I use both of the medium pink and the dark pink, the 2 pink colors I'll use, and then an I-cord loop that will be used for hanging. And then the other thing that I do is I line the stockings with poly fleece. So just so that nothing catches on the stranded yarns in the back, and so that to help it from stretching too much lengthways. Poly fleece stretches in one direction and not the other. So I make sure that the stretchy part is in this direction and the non-stretchy part is that way, so that it will help to hold the stocking's shape when it's hanging and it's full of things. Usually the kind of poly fleece I line it with is something that's close in color. Like I would have chosen probably either a dark pink or the medium pink if I could have found something like that at the fabric store. Because I knew that this baby was going to be called Rosie, I thought it would be fun if I could get some fleece that would have roses on it. So I found some online and I ordered it, and it should be here in a couple of days. So this weekend I'll just be weaving in ends and washing and blocking, and then once the fleece has come in, I'll do a little videotape of how I do that, how I create the lining for this. It's pretty simple. Now my daughter, who lives in Amsterdam, she and her boyfriend celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah. She grew up celebrating Hanukkah at her Nana's house. We didn't really do anything in our house. And once she went to college, she was celebrating, Christmas with her friends, just winter holidays. And she had mentioned earlier this year that she and Sam would like to have stockings, but they did want their names on the stockings. And so what I'm going to do for hers, I'm making a modification of this final band at the bottom. They both have short names, and so I'll be able to knit their names in at the bottom there. That will be happening probably over the next month or so. I'll be knitting their stockings as well. So maybe I'll get a little bit more practice with some stranded color work, and I'll be a little bit happier about my results. The other project that I started like a week, I don't even remember when it started. It was during all of this was happening. My mom and her husband moved into a retirement community down in Wisconsin. And so I drove down there. It's been like 2 weeks now when I drove down there and just to kind of see them settle. They had people who were helping them unpack and doing all that. And so my plan was I was going to show up at the tail end of all the unpacking so that I wouldn't be in the way. Unfortunately, there was a delay in getting them into the apartment, and so they were behind schedule. So when I showed up, everything was all over the place, and I was kind of just sitting in a chair trying not to take up room. And I thought, well, I'm going to go out to the car and get my knitting project, just get my little baggie with the sock in it that I was working on. And the sock that I was going to knit while I was down there was going to be the match to my solar system sock that I had knit a few weeks earlier. I thought, well, this would be a perfect time to knit the second one. I don't really have to think about it. I've got all my notes. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I had it in a little Ziploc bag. I packed it up here in my office, and I put it on the floor of the door to my office so that when I was getting ready to leave and I was turning my lights off and, you know, all that kind of stuff, that it would be in my way and I'd have to pick it up in order to take it downstairs and then put it in my suitcase. And what I did instead was when I left my office, I stepped over it. I guess. I stepped over it and never made it into my suitcase. So I went there and I was in a panic because that's the first thing you think of when you're a knitter and you're going on a trip is what knitting am I going to take with me? And so I knew exactly what knitting I was going to take and it didn't come with me. And there was nothing I could do. I was sitting in this chair and I didn't know what to do. Now I had looked online several weeks before to see if there were any knit shops in the area. Because anytime I go on a trip, I look what knit shops are in the area. And I thought if I'm going to be coming down here fairly regularly, I want to know where the nearest yarn shop is. And it turned out that there was one in a little town only 5 or 6 miles away. And it looked like a nice one. They had spinning supplies. They have all, you know, it looked like a really nice little yarn shop. It wasn't just a big, I was afraid the only thing there would be like a big box store or a Walmart or something. And so I was sitting there in this chair with no knitting, and Al said, my mom's husband said, oh, we're going to need a shower curtain because this is not a, you know, walk-in shower. It's like in a tub. We need a shower curtain. And I said, I'll go get one for you. So I ran to Target, and then very close to Target was this yarn shop, and I ran into that yarn shop and I'm like, I need some self-striping sock yarn and I need it now. And so she showed me this display and they're beautiful. In Hanks, and they were like, they look like an indie dyer, and you can't tell with self-striping yarn. Sometimes you can't tell self-striping yarn from just a variegated yarn. You don't know if it's going to self-stripe unless they tell you or there's a picture so you can see what it looks like. In this case, the label said self-striping on it, and I just liked the colors in that skein. So I picked that skein. She warned me there's no nylon in this, and I said, that's okay, I can reinforce it if I need to. And I got my circular needle because I used magic loop, and I left. And so, you know, I wound up the yarn that night, got the sock started, and then my father-in-law died the next morning, and then I had to drive home, so I didn't even really start it. But once I got home, I did start the sock. It's a really interesting self-striping yarn because you'll have areas where it's just alternating between 2 colors, and then it shifts to 2 other colors, and then it shifts to 2 more colors. And I thought, well, this is really interesting, but I'm wondering if I'm going to be able to make matching socks or not. Because like this solar system yarn is non-repeating, except there are 2 repeats in the skein. And so it's marked the halfway point so that you can make 2 more or less matching socks from that skein. So within one sock, the pattern doesn't repeat, but you can make matching socks. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I wonder if this repeats all, if it just keeps changing. And so I was looking up this colorway on Ravelry, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't repeat. So then I'm not going to worry too much about exactly where I start the second sock. I'm just going to start it and then continue on. One thing that I was doing differently with this sock, so this year I've been working on doing socks toe up because my preferred method is cuff down. I've never liked toe up, so I'm determined to find techniques in toe up socks that I like that can only be done toe up and use, so that I can find when it would be advantageous for me personally to knit a sock toe up. One of the things that I've been checking out is different ways of doing heel flap and gusset shaping. Just because of the way heel flap and gusset is done, if you want the same look, the process is very different, and people have different takes on how to produce a heel flap and gusset construction. And some of them are easier than others, but not as obvious how to modify. So that's what I've been experimenting with. And so with this sock, I got a result that is exactly the kind of fit, everything that I would get if I had done it cuff down. And the process is different enough that I really had to spend time trying to figure out, you know, what's going on, how's this working, like how can I understand what's happening in reverse and plan for those modifications. Just the way that this particular pattern was written, it was written in such a way that it fit my high instep. And I thought, well, what if you didn't have a high instep? Or what if what if your foot was shaped differently? So I have been working on that and figuring that out. I finally understand fundamentally what's going on with this construction. But this fits me really well. The heel flap and gusset that I used for the solar system sock fits okay. It doesn't fit great. It fits well enough for me to wear the sock, but it's a construction method that it's not obvious to me how you could help somebody modify it to get a better fit, and how you could predict that. I haven't quite figured that out yet. And that's something I really do like to understand, is not just how can I get this to fit me, but how can I help other people who want to use this construction? How can they predict whether or not it needs to be modified in order to fit them? And then how would they need to modify it? So those are the kinds of things that I've been working on. In the meantime, after I finished this first one, I did, what happened? I must have pulled my needle out. I'll have to recapture everything. I don't know how that happened. I did start the second sock of the solar system sock. I'm just about ready to start the shaping for the calf. That was when I stopped because I was trying to make some decisions about that. One of the problems with toe up construction and self-striping yarn is that you have to make the sock foot a very specific number of rounds in order for it to fit correctly. You can't fudge it. Well, you could, but then it wouldn't fit as accurately. But with cuff down, if I don't hit a certain place in the striping sequence at the time that I want to start the heel, I could work an extra round or half a round or whatever until I'm at the exact point where I want to be when I split for the heel. But with toe up, you have to start the gusset when it needs to start. You have to start the heel when it needs to start in order for the foot to be the correct length. And what that did for this first sock is that I was knitting all of this yellow and orange yarn here, and there were just a little bit left before I started the heel, so that after I finished the heel, I ended up with a couple of stripes, a couple of rounds of this yellow color, and I thought, oh, what's going to happen with the second sock? And what happened was that I finished the yellow yarn with the second sock before I started the heel, so there is no little yellow stripe right there. So, for me, that's a downside of using self-striping yarn with a toe-up sock if you're picky about how those stripes are divided up. And I tend to be picky about that because I knit cuff down and because it made it fairly easy to make that adjustment and not have it affect the fit. So, every construction method has advantages and disadvantages. And so that's the problem with this solar system sock. But it'll be okay. It's not the end of the world, but it is something for me to kind of think about. If I had forethought, if I'd known ahead of time that that was going to happen, I could have just eliminated the rest of that yellow and continued on, but I didn't know that was going to happen. And now some people would say, well, that's why I always knit 2 at a time. And that might be exactly the reason that would be good for you to knit 2 at a time, because you don't want these kinds of issues. I can't stand knitting 2 at a time. I feel like it's slowing me down and slowing me down. And if I get to a point where I think, oh no, this isn't right, this isn't where I should have done this, I'm going to need to rip back, then I have to rip back both socks. So that's something that I don't particularly enjoy. Again, doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that for my knitting process and the way that I like to work, that's not a solution that would work for me, even if it is a solution that works really well for you. I have been working on a hand spinning breed study for the past couple of months. I bought a kit off of Etsy that has 30 different wool breeds, 1 ounce each of what's called combed top, that I could spin on my spinning wheel, and I could see how I could just experience a lot of different wool breeds with a small amount of fiber, and kind of get a sense of what those different breeds were like. Now, this is all what's prepared already, and it's prepared in a specific way called combed top that doesn't always give you a real indication of what that wool was like when it came off the sheep, in terms of what the crimp was like and all of that. So there's can be a limit when you're working with combed top. But not everybody is a hand spinner. Some people who are not spinners have been kind of really interested in the different, seeing what I've spun with these different wool breeds. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, if this is something that's interesting to you to experiment with different wool breeds, how you can do that without necessarily being a hand spinner. But I want to talk about what the options are for spinners, but also what the options are for knitters. So one option for spinners is to go to a fiber festival and buy raw fleece. So they've shorn the sheep and they've done what's called skirting it. They get all the kind of real poopy bits out, and they bag it up into a bag, and you can buy that from the shepherd at a fiber festival. It can be difficult when you don't know what you're looking for and you don't really know what you're doing, if you're picking a good one out or not. The fiber festival that we have in our area has a competition, as well as the vendors selling their stuff. There's a competition where people can enter their fleeces from sheep from their flocks into this competition, and they do it by breed. And so that if you have a blue-faced Leicester sheep, that your fleece is being judged against other blue-faced Leicester, and they have certain qualities that they're looking for. And so they get judged, and then they have a silent auction later in the afternoon. And so you can see the judges' comments. So you sort of get somebody letting you know that this is a good one. But you might not know how much to bid for it. How much is it worth? You might not have any idea. So then you have to bring it home, and you have to prepare it. You have to wash it. You have to scour the lanolin and the dirt and the sweat and everything out of the wool. And then you can do things like card it or comb it, or do different preparations before you then begin to spin it. So that takes more knowledge and more work and effort than you might be willing to do. Well, then there are ways to buy clean fleece, and that is far harder to do. The company that I bought my drum carder from is called Clemis and Clemis, and I'll leave a link down below. And it's a father and son outfit. They're woodworkers. One of the things that they do is they go fiber festival to fiber festival selling their drum carders, and sometimes there are shepherds who were just at this local fiber festival. It's the only festival they're at, and maybe the weather's bad or something happens and they can't sell their fleece, and it's really hard on them. And what Clemis and Clemis has done is they've gotten to know all of these shepherds, and they've taken all this training in being able to evaluate fleeces. So they will go, through the fiber festival season, and they will buy up really good quality fleeces from different shepherds across the country. And then at the end of the season, when they go back to California, they have all of these fleeces, and they scour them, and they sell them through like a club membership. I think it's every quarter or every couple of months, something like that. And you can buy the quantity of what you want, but it's called something like a good clean fleece, I think is what they call it. So if you want to work from the fleece, but you don't have to go through that problem of preparing it, you could do that. Or you can buy like combed top, and combed top is pretty widely available in all kinds of places, at fiber festivals and online, and you can get any number of breeds that way. And then there are smaller mills or shepherds or whatever that might also sell their products online as well. Well, if you're not a spinner and you're interested in knitting with yarns that were made from different wool breeds, that was what I originally had wanted to do in early 2018. I sort of gotten this inkling about, of other wool breeds. I don't think I ever realized that it made a difference what breed of sheep the wool came from. And I started hearing more about that and wanting to explore more breeds, and found it hard to find at local yarn shops. There were a few things you could find here and there. And that was when I went to a fiber festival and thought, oh, I'm going to need to learn to spin. Well, since then, it's been more awareness and more enthusiasm amongst knitters and spinners for getting hold of more unusual breeds, unusual or even rare breeds. And so you are finding mills, and you are finding sellers online, and often even at local yarn shops that are selling other breeds. And like when I first started learning to spin, and I heard about the idea of a breed study from people in my knitting group, they had done one time, and I looked and I couldn't find anything. But now you go on Etsy and there's tons of ways of doing that. So I think it's just really gotten a lot more popular. And then Clara Parks with her wool channel that she started this past spring is another way that you can find out more about different breeds and connect with other knitters or spinners and learn more about wool. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm exploring both yarns, but also spinning things myself. So I believe on places like Etsy, you might even be able to do a breed study from quantities of raw fleece. That might be something that's possible. I can't give you a link to something specific, but there's just more out there than there was before. One of the books that I use in my breed study just to kind of learn more is this book by Deborah Robson and Carol Acarius called The Fleece and Fiber Source Book. And so these breeds are, the book is divided up into sort of categories of breeds, and rather than just strictly alphabetically. So they'll have like primitive breeds, or they'll have long wool breeds, or they'll have the down breeds, or this thing or that thing. So they're kind of categorized in that way, like what are the similarities between wool breeds that are in this category. And then they have samples of the raw fleece, the clean fleece, the spun yarn, something knitted or woven, so that you can see, what it looks like in that situation. So all of these are other ways that are just various ways that you can explore doing a breed study of your own. Maybe you just want to try exploring knitting with other yarns. Now, I've gotten a couple of times in a couple places, and I don't know if it's the same person or not who's told me about this, but there is a seller online. Oh, where is it? I think it's called Blacker Yarns. I'll put it on the screen and then down below, but I believe it's called Blacker Yarns, and they sell rare breed wool yarns as well. So there are a couple of other sources. If you know of any, you're welcome to leave. If you want to leave links to an external link, I would do it in my Ravelry group in the thread that has to do with this week's video. If you want to leave a link in the comments and it's an external link, it was more than likely will get deleted by YouTube. So you need to find a way to name the company or write out the website in a way but you're not leaving an actual URL, because it will get deleted by YouTube. I don't have control over that. I spun 3 different yarns this week. This was the blackest yarn. This is a very, very dark brown, and it's not showing up well on camera. This is Jacob. So Jacob, apparently those sheep are usually white with some black spots, I think. But here in the US, they do have some that are just white and some that are just black. And so I don't know if this, I assume this came from a purely black Jacob and that they didn't separate the different sections of the fleece out in order to make the yarn. I could be wrong. I loved spinning this. It was easy to spin. It was just delightful to spin, and it really plumped up. You can't even see it, it's so dark, but it plumped up. It's really squishy. It looks so even. And again, it's really hard to see what this looks like. I wonder if I could get closer and you could see better. There we go. It's just, I just love this. And I don't know that I would want to spin like a sweater's worth of black Jacob, because I just know from knitting a sweater's worth of Zwartbles, which is another black breed, it's just hard to see what you're doing. But this, since this comes in other colors, I would be interested in spinning Jacob again. I just love this. I'm so happy with this yarn and the way it looks and the way it feels, the way it squishes in my hands. Love, love it. This one is the Lincoln, and I don't know if this is called Lincoln long wool, or it is the long wool. I mean, the staple length was over 7 inches. So it's not coarse like some of the other really long wools that I have spun so far. It's very smooth and very shiny. I didn't particularly love spinning it. I didn't really enjoy it. I wasn't battling it. I just didn't, it's just so long, and what I am learning from this breed study is I don't really care for really long wools. I like them a little shorter than that. So this looks like it might be rough, but it's not. Like, I have another one that I spun that looks very similar to this, and maybe not as shiny looking, that is just so coarse it feels like a rug. But this is actually nice feeling. I just didn't particularly love spinning with it. And part of that might have been I loved the Jacob so much. It was a contrast to that. This is the one I spun, I think it was yesterday. It's called Masham. And from what I am gathering, Masham is a mule, not meaning like a donkey horse cross, but a type of sheep cross where they'll take a hardy ewe that thrives in a particular type of climate and a landscape, and they'll cross that with, you know, some kind of ram that has qualities that they like. So it could be mixes of different types of sheep, and it's not clear what this one is. This was actually very nice to spin. I really enjoyed spinning it, and I was looking forward to the resulting yarn. I might have overspun the singles, maybe a little, I don't know. This is just so fascinating to me to see how different the yarns turn out. I don't love the result. I feel like it's kind of limp and there's not stretch or bounce to it. I wouldn't particularly want to knit with this, but it was really nice to spin. So go figure. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.